So you should see your image somewhere like this. The layers palette should be over here, and if you don't see any of these palettes, you can go into the window menu and find it in here. So layers is open. The other thing we're going to need open is the measurement log. We don't need channels. We can turn that off. And the toolbar, or toolbox, or tools, or whatever it's called. I don't know what it's called. Tools, down at the bottom here. So, like I say, I've already calibrated this, so I know that that black square is actually 1 centimeter. And we're going to use a tool here in Photoshop called the measure tool, the ruler tool. It's in your tools under the eyedropper. So this little picture of an eyedropper here, if you hold down your mouse, you can see some sub-menus down here, and you can choose the ruler tool. And I think there's a shortcut for it. What is that, an L? It's not L. Is it a capital I? Yeah, capital I. And so this allows us to take linear measurements on this image. Okay? Now this is an important part. So most of you who've used Photoshop have probably never had to do this before, but we need to calibrate Photoshop now. So we need to tell Photoshop how big 1 pixel is. Because if I zoom in on this thing, I keep zooming in, you can see it's made up of pixels, right? Little dots. Each one of these squares. So it doesn't know from centimeters. So we have to go in and tell it how big a centimeter is. Because if I do a measurement here, it's giving me a length. It's going to give me a length in pixels. So you can see up here, length 1. That's the measurement in pixels. Pixels are not really useful to me. So what we need to do is to go to somewhere under image, and you're going to have to do this when you do your reconstruction. So I'm recording this so you can come back to it. But to calibrate your measuring tool, you have to go to image and then down to analysis and simply set the measurement scale. So by default, it's on default, which means it's measuring in pixels, so it's 1:1 pixels. And we have to go to custom here. Okay. So if we open this up, it's saying 1 pixel length is 1 pixel. Duh, right? So we want to say that 1 pixel length is, we want to change it to centimeters. And so it says the ruler tool has been activated while this dialog is open. You may use it to measure the pixel length for use in your scale. So we've told it we want to use logical units of centimeters. So we now have to go into our image and measure something we know is a centimeter. And it's the little black square. So if we zoom in here, so the shortcut for zoom is holding down Option and scrolling. And then spacebar will bring up this little hand. And if you hold down spacebar, you can track your image back and forth. It's very difficult to go from Maya into Photoshop because then your fingers get all mixed up. So I'm just going to zoom in as close as I can to this cube so I start even seeing the pixels and the anti-aliased pixels on the edge. So something like this. And then I've got the ruler open, so I'm just going to click on one edge of my little cube here. I'll hold down Shift to keep the line straight. Drag over to the other corner and let go. And so what's happened is I've measured that this little cube or square is actually 119 pixels wide. And I've told Photoshop now that 119 pixels equals 1 centimeter. So now I can do linear measurements and I'll get centimeter results. So if I click on OK now, and as I would hope up here I would see 1 because now the length 1 on the ruler tool is giving me results in centimeters. So if I do another measure, maybe try and do about halfway along this cube, then I should get about 0.5. So that looks like it's working. So that's the easy part. So now we have to go in and start making these measurements. So I'm just going to kind of zoom in on the lateral view of my skull here. So you can see what we have here in close-up. We've been looking at all class. Oh, dude, as I'm recording this. So we've got the nasal bones up here, and here's the distal portion. These are, I mean, this is not a real skull, so we have pretty straight nasals. And then the anterior nasal spine is kind of pointing up a little bit here. I think what you'll find is, what I've always found, is that the description for measuring that tangent coming out of the anterior nasal spine is very vague. And I've seen students come up with vastly different results. Because you can imagine that if one student could say, or one person could say, well, I think, you know, that's the general direction. But if somebody made a slightly different decision, and you can see that the decision change is very minor down here, but if you extend that out, you know, the result starts to expand over space. And if somebody decided, oh, we're supposed to measure it this way along the top, then you get a totally different result. Others might interpret to follow the maxilla, or the external surface, which is obviously wrong, but you can see that there's a lot of potential for error here. So let me just pop back into Rin, see what he says. What do we have to measure here? So let's talk about a little bit of the terminology he uses. He talks about the nasion-prostheon plane. So in his description, when you were reading it, you probably saw he spent a lot of time talking about setting up a new axis for recording from. Because the skull, when you're doing measurements, what is the basis for your measurements? Where are you measuring from? What is the baseline? And he found using the Frankfurt horizontal plane, which is pictured here, was not useful for doing the nose, because this plane would be very different for different noses. If somebody had a very dish-shaped face, a receding chin, a nose that came far out. So he defined a new axis of measurement and called this the nasion-prostheon plane. So prostheon is the same as what's it called? Infratentale, supratentale, the one between the top central incisors. So if you draw a line from nasion to prostheon, which is that point between on the alveolar process between the two central incisors on the top, that's the plane that we're doing our measurements from now. So what measurements do we have to take? Let's look. Oh, this is the wrong article, I think. Let's just open it up. Okay, so the prediction of the nasal morphology here. So this is a description of all the different types of measurements he was taking to figure out if the bony landmarks give an indication of the shape of the nose. And like I say, he found those 3 measurements were most useful. So he's measuring from the measurement X, the red line, from nasion to acanthion, the tip of the anterior nasal spine. So let me do that one in Photoshop. So now we can't really quite see where it is here in this view, where nasion is. So I've lined these skulls up, but we can see where nasion would be here at this suture, or somewhere around this area. So in Photoshop, if you want to use a guide, you can see the rulers up here, the top and the side. If you don't see those, Command R is the shortcut for that. But I can just click in there and drag down a horizontal ruler. Sorry, not a ruler, a guide. And I can then use that to tell me where nasion is on the lateral view of the skull. Okay, so that's good. And acanthion is easy to identify. It's just the tip of the nasal spine here. So I can use my ruler tool, which is I. Yeah, the short form is I for that, or the keyboard shortcut. So if I just click on this point on the skull and drag down to Acanthyon and release, it gives me a measure up here of 4.47. Now you can just jot this down, or if you have the measurement log open, and it's under the window again, measurement log, once you've made a measurement, when it's still active, you can just say record measurement, and it will keep it down here. So 4.46, blah, blah, blah. Also gives you an angle from the horizontal, or from the vertical, I guess. So we've got that measurement. So unfortunately, you can't change the name of the label here, unless there's a way to do it that I don't know about. So let's look back in RIN. And so Y is from subspinale to rhinion. So subspinale is a little bit arbitrary. You're trying to find the most recessed point below the anterior nasal spine, so it's going to be somewhere like this. So I can take this measurement to rhinion, and that gives me 3.59. I can record that measurement. And then Z is from nasion to subspinale. And I can do that here. And that gives me 4.93 centimeters. Now remember, all RIN stuff is in millimeters. I guess I could have done this in millimeters, but anyway. So now I've got these measurements over here. So X, Y, and Z. So let's go back into those regression equations. So for X, it was 44.7 millimeters, let's say. And then Y is 35.9 millimeters. We round up. And then Z is 49.3. Okay, so here are the results. For pronasally anterior, we get 26.3. For pronasally vertical, we get 38.2. And for pronasally frontal Frankfurt horizontal plane, we get 27.4. So let's look back in RIN's article again. If I can find it. So here's pronasally anterior, number 1, pronasally vertical, and then pronasally Frankfurt horizontal plane. So this part gets a little bit tricky, a little finger gymnastics here. So what I want you to note here is that number 1 is measured, so this is pronasally anterior, is measured at a 90-degree angle from the NPP, the nasion-prostheon plane, as opposed to this one, the Frankfurt horizontal plane pronasally, which is just along this horizontal. It's not based on the angle here. So we have to measure them a little bit differently. And we have to find the distance to 1, mark that point, and then 90 degrees from on this angle, find the distance for 2, which is pronasally vertical. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. So let's look at the number for 1 again. That was 26.3. So how do we measure this? So we find nasion here, and we want to measure a 90-degree angle. Oops. Oops. Ugh. I'm using Maya shortcuts. So we have to put a plane that goes from prostheon to nasion. That's the nasion-procyon plane, and that's the plane we have to make an angle from. So the easiest way to do this, if I just clear my, okay, I don't have enough space to do this. There's a button to clear your measurement. But if I just start a new measurement from Procyon here and go to nasion, so there's my nasion-procyon plane. I don't care about the length of this, but I want to use its angle. I have to remember that number again. What was that number again? 26.3. So to figure out a 90-degree angle from this line, if you hold down, with this measure still in place, if you hold down Option, the ruler tool, you can see I start to get a little angle measurement there. So keep Option held down, click at the point at nasion, and drag out, and it's going to drag out a new measure. And I can't lift my fingers off the, well, you can see, whoa, don't do that. Up at the top there, you see where it says A? That's the angle. So I want to keep that at 90, and I want length 2 to go to, what was it? 26.9? 26.3. So I want to pull this out to 26.3-ish. I got it, 4, and then I want to get the angle to 90. That's pretty close, and I can release. So there is our measure for pronasale anterior. So I want to mark where this point is so I can drag a ruler out from the side here. I can drag a ruler down from the top here. And if I start making another measure, those measure tools are going to be erased. So in the layers palette, down at the bottom here, sorry, it's right at the bottom of my screen, but there's a little page with the turned corner. If I click on that, I can make a new layer. And on that layer, whoops, I can go to my paintbrush or just hit B on the keyboard, and I can just do a little rough mark where that is. That's maybe too rough. And I'll just say pronasale, that's a P by the way, anterior. Ah, okay. So, what's next? So now we got to do pronasale vertical. The measure for that is 38.2. Is that right? Let me just double check. Yep. So again, that has to be a 90-degree angle from this line that we just drew. So we can do the same technique. We can go to our measure tool and then click in here. Oh, I want to be able to clear this. Sorry, just my screen resolution is so low. There's a button here to clear. Is that it? Oh, what a miracle. Okay. So we're going to go from nasion, which is here, back up to this point that we just established and release. And again, we can hold down Option to get our angle measure and keep it at 90 degrees and then measure at the number that I've already forgotten. 38.2. Thank you. So a little, I gotta finagle this a bit. And so we get another point here. So that's pretty far out, right? That looks like that's going to be a pretty long nose. So we get that point, and on this same layer, I'm just going to name this layer points. I can hit B to go to my brush tool and just make another mark right there. And that is PV. And finally, we're going to do the pronasale Frankfurt horizontal plane. And we measured that one as being 27.4. So that starts at subspinale and just goes out in the horizontal, since we already have the skull angled at the Frankfurt horizontal. So I'll use my measure tool. I figured out that button. Clear. I've forgotten the number already, 27.3, 27.4. So again, just doing the same thing, 27.4, and I get that point there. Oops. Unfortunately, undo doesn't work with the measure tool. So we're going to have something like this. And so we get something that's largely on the same plane here. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you get a point that is slightly different. And that's the information I don't know how to deal with in his measurement sometimes. But if we look at his thing here, so you can see it's giving us this point, and then the Frankfurt horizontal is giving us the maximum position of pronasale. Now he's got these measurements here, 4, 5, and 6, but he does not describe how to establish them or where to measure them from. I think you need your soft tissue markers there in place first. But this gives us some guide, at least to start. And so we would have a nose that's going to go something like this following this. That's going to be the maximum extent of the nose. But he also says that you should establish the Gerasimov lines, the two tangent lines. So to do that, there's a little line tool down here at the bottom. It's under the rectangle tool. The shortcut is U. Sorry, it's hard to see. It's right down at the bottom. We can go into the line tool, and then we can use this to try and measure this. So we're just drawing tangents roughly from the end of the nasals, so something like that, and then the general direction of the anterior nasal spine. And it gives us an idea that this is sort of a straight across, slightly upturned nose, according to their description. So the nose isn't going to go anywhere past this. And then you have a marker at subspinale that's going to give you the thickness of the lip here. And so we're going to wind up with something like this. And then there are measurements to figure out where the ala will go. And then there's no real good measurement for the nostrils, but we'd end up with something like this. So it looks weird, but remember the lips are going to be, it's going to be something like that, meeting a couple of meters above. There's going to be markers down here that indicate the thickness of the lip. So it kind of looks big, but I don't think it's out of whack with what we're seeing here. But these are the guidelines that we have. There's nothing else, right? We can also look at, remember his guideline about the shape of the aperture here is going to give some indication of the shape of pronasale. So what I'd like you guys to do is not what I just did, but I wanted to show it to you. What I want you to do is use those same techniques and figure out the width of the mouth. Okay, we talked about it last week. Simple. You measure from the outer edge of the canines in the front view, multiply that by 1.33. So canine to canine measure times 1.33 gives you chelion to chelion, which is the corner of the mouth. We also know that the lips they meet just about 2 millimeters above the lower incisal edge of the upper incisors. So you can figure that out with the measuring tool too. So what I just did is complicated. That's pretty simple, but using the same technique. So I'd just like you to try that. What time is it? Oh, okay. Okay, you don't have to do that now. We can do it next week. I want to give you time to finish up. I told you I'd give you an hour. So I just wanted to introduce that. I'm going to stop.